Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Linda Jurgen, and it is my pleasure to serve as your worship associate for the month of October. We are a liberal, progressive congregation, open to those who share our values of free thought and lifelong learning. We welcome you without regard to race, creed, age, economic status, physical ability, national origin, gender expression, or sexual orientation. These are some of the categories that have divided rather than united people of faith in the past. We do not require that you believe the same as we. Indeed, here you will find many different paths. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. The topic for the month of October is reason. So this morning I will share a bit of how I got here. During most of my upbringing, I was unchurched, but always identified as Methodist, even though I attended only sporadically as a child, and then not at all after I moved away from Walla Walla in third grade. Oh, the front row is open for seating, guys. The whole thing. So come on down. Okay. All right. I remember in high school beginning to question traditional Christian beliefs in Latin class. I was bothered by the plight of the Romans. How could they accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior, given that many of them lived before Jesus was born? That process went on and led me to think of Africans, Asians, Native Americans, Jews, everyone whose beliefs did not align with Christianity. And that reasoning led me to frankly just give it up. Nevertheless, when I was 20 and ready to get married, remember these are the old days, I thought that I was going to have a church wedding, what I considered to be the only respectable wedding. I was going to have to find a church. So I went shopping. I had two criteria. One, an attractive romantic building. And two, a minister who used good grammar. After visiting several, I decided on a Presbyterian church in Fullerton, near my parents' house. It had faux flying buttresses and a literate minister. For 27 years, that church experience, was enough. Then, at age 48, I found Unitarian Universalism, and I was able to come out as a non-Christian woman, finding legitimacy for my beliefs here at Tapestry. The building is no longer very important to me, and our minister, well, he uses excellent grammar. If you are a Facebook user, be sure to check in and tell your friends how cool we are. Now, please take a moment to turn off mobile phones or other beeping devices that might disrupt our worship time together. Also, so that we can maintain a contemplative atmosphere, please hold your applause until after the postlude is finished and the service is completed. We are a welcoming congregation, and we extend a warm greeting to any newcomers. We invite those of you who are visiting for the first or second time to please stand and introduce yourselves if you're comfortable, so that we can have the opportunity to get to know you. Are there any new people here today? Great.
Hi, I'm Betsy Franklin, my daughter Amber. It's our first
Welcome.
My name is Brigitte. I'm from Germany, and it's my first time.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm Lydia Metcalf, my husband Mike. This is our second time.
Wonderful, welcome. Okay.
My son Paul. This isn't our first or second time, but it's been infrequent visitors, so we just want to say hello and thank you.
Great. Okay, if you are new, we invite you to stop by the greeters table to pick up an informational packet. And we invite everyone to join us after the service for conversation and refreshments served out on the patio. Also, today is the first Sunday brunch. And we would like for you to stay for that, even if you didn't bring food, if you're not prepared that way. There is always plenty. If you have been coming for a while, but are not yet a member and feel you have found a spiritual home with us, please talk to our minister, a member of the membership committee, or someone at the greeters table about becoming one. We heartily welcome everyone. So now please extend a greeting to those sitting near you. We have exciting events coming up at Tapestry. Today we have our potluck lunch, and then this afternoon, hopefully, at 3 o'clock, we have our Yappy Hour. It will be held at Mountain View Park, God willing, 3 to 6. A barbecue dinner is included for the price of $15 for adults and $25 for families. It's a fundraising event. Yappy Hour will feature a costume contest for the dogs and assorted people, and an agility course for the dogs. And in the spirit of St. Francis, Reverend Kent will bless our pets. You can find out more information about these and other upcoming events in the order of service or on our website. Our various groups and events reflect our vision of being a transformational home for liberal spirituality and a dynamic leader in Orange County and beyond. And now, Bonnie Coombs will light our flaming chalice, the central symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe.
With thankful hearts, we've come together this morning to celebrate the bounty of the day, to bask in the warmth of this community, and to share with friends the tides of our lives, to entertain our hopes for a better future. We join together this morning, as always, to resist injustice and inequality wherever they may be found. And our hearts are touched by the human need we feel around us, whether here at the length of our hand or around the world. We come here to be together because this is how we believe life is best lived. In questioning and in conversation, in compassion and in service, in gratitude and in joy. It's good to be together. It's good to be with you this morning. Welcome to Tapestry. Every Sunday as we gather for worship, we pause to mention the events in our own lives that make us who we are. Some do that by silently lighting a candle of joy or sorrow. Some have written messages to share. This morning, there was only one message that was in our basket, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit. There's been a lot of violence in the news this week. So today we lift up our thoughts and our prayers for the victims and the perpetrators of violence in Oregon and in Syria and in Afghanistan and everywhere else. This week, President Obama reminded us that thoughts and prayers are an inadequate response to gun violence in our country. So, like all of our prayers, we lift this one up, not in place of action, but in preparation for action. To do what we can to bring more wholeness to our sometimes broken world. We remember those affected by violence. We remember all those in our community who have joys and sorrows beyond what have been shared aloud, but still stir in our hearts. And now for our young and young at heart, Caitlin has a story to share with us. If you want to come up front so you can hear and maybe see some pictures. Yes. Great.
Good morning. Well, you're not behind any tall people now.
No matter where I move.
Well, now you're right in front. You're perfect, Kathy.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, Owen. Am I doing that?
Maybe.
Jake is shaking his head that I'm not doing that.
Maybe it's us.
All right, so good morning.
Maybe it's
Can you sit next to each other? Yeah? Okay. All right, so how many principles do we have? 7, exactly. So one of the principles in the adult language is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, which is awesome because you guys have the privilege and the challenge to figure out what you believe and what you think is true, which is awesome. All right? This book, I think all of you think is true to begin with, but I really like it, and it has awesome, beautiful pictures, so I apologize to those of you who can't see the pictures. It's called The Everything Seed, A Story of Beginnings. Have you ever watched a seed grow? Have you ever noticed how it begins so small, so still, so quiet, like a gift waiting to be opened, and how slowly it wakes up, begins to unfold, growing into something larger? And larger and larger. Then you know that whatever comes from a seed, it usually ends up looking very little like the seed it came from, which is also true of the very first seed. Once, long, long ago, way back before the beginning, so long ago there was no such thing as time because there was no one there to count it. Everywhere was a huge, deep, mysterious place, like something waiting to happen. There were no stars, no sun or moon. There was no place like Earth, not a drop of water, or a single tree, or a rock, or a flower, and no living beings anywhere. So it's just all black, yeah? But in that deep waiting space was hidden the tiniest something, no bigger than a seed. It was not a flower seed. It was not an elm tree seed. It was not a seed of corn, although all of those things were included in the seed. You might call it an everything seed, because that is what it became. No one knows where that first seed came from, or how it was planted, or how it knew, in the way that only seeds seem to know, how long to wait for just the right moment to sprout and grow. But all at once, this tiny seed, cradled and nourished in the rich soil of space, woke up, broke open, and began to unfold. Unfolding and blossoming forth into an enormous blazing ball of bright light. like a great-grandmother's son. And the universe was born. Out fluttered the galaxies like a storm of snowflakes swirling and gathering into the brightest, most blindingly beautiful clouds of stars. And out of those star clouds whirled our very own star, the one we call the sun, and our Earth, and the moon, and all the round spinning planets we have learned how to name. And this is the secret of that tiny seed. You and I were there in the very beginning. Just as the idea for each leaf on a big oak tree lies hidden inside an acorn, we were there with all the stars and planets, all the rocks and oceans, plants and animals and people. Everything that is now, ever was, or ever will be was inside that first tiny seed. So, whenever you hold a seed in your hand and wonder what it could become, imagine how you and all that there is once came from the tiniest speck of an everything seed before it sprouted and grew long, long ago into the way back beginning of time. Now, if this were an ordinary story, it would end right here. But this is the story of the universe. It keeps unfolding. What once began in a blazing blossom of light continues every day. New stars sprout open in the deep soil of space. New plants and animals appear on the earth. Seeds of many kinds are scattered everywhere to help us remember. And new people are born every day with the spark of that first light still alive and burning deep inside, waiting, like the everything seed, to shine in ways that are yet to be known. So you guys get to grow up to shine as well, right? Yeah? Vincent's ready? All right, we are going to go to our classes. We'll see you guys in there. Thank you.
Before I dive into this sermon, I want to thank Jeanette and Bill and possibly the most musical family I have ever met. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. So this morning is the first Sunday of a new month, and we're approaching a new topic for the month. This month we'll be exploring the role of reason in our faith tradition. In a way, reason means removing the assumptions of what we think we know. It means setting aside some of the cultural frameworks and seeing just what is in front of us for a moment. One of the most powerful exercises I have had with understanding reason comes from just looking at a picture. We're familiar probably with the pictures that sort of have two things in one, depending on how you look at them. You know, there's the candlestick that may be the two faces looking at each other, or as I like to think, a chalice that is two faces looking at each other. And then there are lots of pictures that depict two different faces in one. They usually contrast a young and old person or a woman and a man. The artist's intent is to offer two strikingly different images in one drawing. Perspective does fascinating things. But the picture that was helpful for me in learning about reason is a little bit different. The picture I'm talking about was used in an exercise for understanding intercultural communications. And I dug and dug and dug to find a copy of this picture to share with you, and I'm very frustrated that I don't have it. But participants are shown this picture and asked simply to describe what they see. But the picture is very, very vague. It's a line drawing of a gathering of people. I think there are probably 5 or 6 people, and they appear to be of African descent. But their genders and their ages are very difficult to decipher. And they're situated in a room with not a whole lot of furniture. So there aren't very many clues to their class status or even the continent that they're on. So as participants in this exercise begin to describe the picture, it becomes nearly impossible to describe just what is depicted without creating new information or making assumptions. Seeing people together in a house, we assume that they're a family. Seeing an arrangement of where people are sitting or standing, we assume things about ages and power structure between those people. And giving certain styles of dress, even though it's not clear, we start to assume things about gender and location and time frame because some of the clothes look a little bit dated. But none of those details are really clear in this drawing. The exercise shows how difficult it is to first focus on what you know for a fact before bringing a whole bunch of your own story to make sense of the information you have. It's very, very important in reason. It reminds me of the famous line from the television show Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. It's very hard for us to see just the facts without making up a whole lot of other ideas. Now, reducing the story to just the facts can be a pretty powerful statement. It's a certain form of truth-telling that can be radical and disturbing if those facts aren't what's generally comfortable. In seminary, one of my professors and mentors taught us about the radical act of truth-telling. In a world invested in maintaining the status quo, telling the truth or sharing a simple, documented piece of history is often seen as radical. Professor Tinker, or Tink as he preferred to be called, is a leader in the American Indian movement. And in nearly every discussion of theology or American history, he reminded us that we were speaking from a Western colonial perspective. He reminded us of the history of genocide and ongoing oppression of indigenous peoples around the world. Now, when you're studying Christian history and theology in America, this genocide wasn't some peripheral piece of the conversation. Christian history is a history of colonialism, and it came up over and over in class. And I took several classes with Tink. In every class, at some point in the semester, someone became deeply upset at the information provided. There were often tears. And they said that he was radical, and they said that he was angry. Over and over again, though, he quietly and gently explained, I'm not angry. I'm not trying to be hurtful. I'm just telling you the truth about what happened here on this land. A huge part of reason is eliminating the extras and boiling things down to what we know for sure. Just the facts. Observing just the facts is a tremendous skill that takes a lot of work to develop, but it's worth our time. So the title of this morning's sermon honestly was a placeholder because there was a newsletter deadline coming up. And I knew I wanted to talk about reason because it's our theme for the month, and I knew that it had to be in the context of our religious lives. But the title is a little bit misleading, the title Faith and Reason, or Reason and Faith. It suggests that these two things are somehow opposite or competing with each other. I even noticed the image that was used to advertise today on Facebook was a intersection of a street sign at the cross streets of reason and faith. But reason and faith are not opposites or even separate paths. For Unitarian Universalists and many other liberal religious people, reason is a core component of faith. Theologians, lay people, scientists, philosophers have always used reason to support their faith in a variety of religious traditions. I've talked a little bit about reason, and we'll get back to reason, but I want to pause for just a minute to talk about faith and what I mean by that very sticky word. When I use the word faith, I mean our truth claim about the universe. We each use a variety of sources to build an idea about the world that we live in. Maybe you'd rather call it a cosmology or a theology. But when I say the word faith, I mean the way you make sense of this great big world and the way your life makes sense within it. We all have some sort of faith. We all have an understanding of the world that we've cobbled together. It doesn't mean that we all have faith in some conscious God who intervenes in human history. It means that we're about the business of finding something to believe in, some foundation for our lives. And I know the skeptics out there are thinking, but that's not what those other people are talking about when they say faith and reason. And it's true. There has been and still is a very prominent strain within Christianity that suggests that reason cannot lead us to God or anything holy or salvation. They deeply believe that having faith just means praying harder and reading the Bible more closely and going to church more and probably giving more. They believe that reason and science have no role in religious life. Now, this strain of Christianity depends on two things that Unitarian Universalism actually gave up a long, long time ago. One of those is an omnipotent God. The other is the idea of original sin, the idea that we humans are inherently morally corrupt and can only be saved through an act of God. So through this mixing and matching of those two core beliefs, the end result is that for some Christians, we lowly humans cannot reason our way closer to God or truth. Perhaps more importantly, we lack the moral capacity to improve ourselves. The only thing we can do is focus on the Bible and pray harder. Now, I'm bringing all of that up because it may be what your neighbors believe, and more importantly, this is the theological backdrop from which Unitarianism emerged. In the early 1800s, a huge theological controversy brewed at Harvard Divinity School, and I know every time I talk about theological controversy, it sounds silly and academic and like people in tweed jackets, like, I don't know, arguing with each other over sherry. But in those days, theological controversy incited mobs of angry people that threw bricks at one another and burned down buildings. It was serious argument. It was a lot of risk involved. In those days, Unitarians emerged as a group of liberal Christians, not so much because of their belief about the Trinity, but because they thought that we could use reason and that we should use reason to become better people and to understand our faith more deeply. We're spending a whole month on the topic of reason because it's our heritage. And it's still a big part of what defines Unitarian Universalism. We believe that every person has the right and the responsibility to think deeply about what seems most true and to nurture a hopeful faith based on our reason. Now, we don't build our faith on reason alone. We also rely on what might be described as the opposite of reason. As it's described in our list of sources, we're influenced by direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. In our tradition, the first source of truth isn't a book or a person who claims to know the right answer. That's not even tradition. For us, the first source is our own personal, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. Now, some of our most prominent thinkers were mystics. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Thomas Starr King. They were moved to their core by what they experienced in nature. And it wasn't the sciencey stuff. They liked that too, but it was more than the science involved. Beyond being pretty, they found deeper truths that flowed beyond the boundaries of reason. And I know they're not alone. I know from talking to many of you that our own spiritual journeys have experienced that interconnection in nature. For me, I sense that richness in natural settings that are particularly life-giving. I realized this just a few weeks ago when I was in Zion, that the desert is pretty, but it doesn't move me in the same way as a forest or being near a stream where life is just abundant and rich. Seeing that richness of nature reminds me that I, as a human animal, belong in this magical place. I don't have to do anything or be anything. I'm simply alive and breathing and being in nature, and I'm a part of it. Other people, though, feel more connected to the spirit of life through connection with other people. In our discussion group on reverence a couple of weeks ago, participants described an awareness of the interconnection between souls. They described energy and connection that went beyond reason, but they felt it and they knew it to be true. That mystical sense of connection is part of their faith. Like reason, it's a source of truth that's a building block for our understanding of the world. Mystical experiences are not reasonable. They're feelings that come to us. They're feelings that enliven our hearts and sometimes boggle our minds. In building our faith, we bring those two very different sources of information together, our reason and our direct experience of the transcendent. And that's a brave engagement, two very different trains of thought. It's like trying to write a poem in two very different languages. And it gets all jumbled up. But it can be a beautifully nuanced poem that describes the truth in amazing ways. Now, I want to close our time together by remembering one of the things that we say every Sunday here at Tapestry. We covenant together to seek truth in love. That little phrase is at the core of our lives together. We will dwell together in peace, we'll help one another, and we will seek truth in love. We embrace reason, and we believe that reason exists in the context of love. In one way, you might see it as a limiting factor on reason. The Buddhist practice of right speech gets at this pretty cleanly. There are basically four rules to right speech in Buddhism. First, don't tell lies. Yeah, that's pretty easy. Second, don't slander others or speak in a way that would cause them harm. Third, don't use rude or abusive language. And fourth, don't engage in idle talk or gossip. If you can't speak within those rules, then it's best not to speak at all. Or, instead of the Buddha, how about the wisdom of your own mother, who probably at some point said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Compassion is the trump card in Buddhism. Silence is better than harming others. So we covenant with one another to seek truth in love. I love that phrase because it's sort of magical. You can turn it inside out. We're called not only to seek the truth in a way that is loving to one another, we're also called to understand that love is the truth. It's the foundation from which other truths come. Love is the basis from which other ways of knowing might emerge. You say it every week, but this is a serious commitment you make, and a somewhat complicated one. We commit to seeking the truth in love at Tapestry. So as we build our faith together, may we welcome in the truths that come from our amazing human capacity to reason. May we also welcome in the truths that stir our hearts. And when all else fails, we know that a simpler, more direct guide to truth is available when we welcome love to guide our steps. Amen.